That would be my recommendation. Yes, essentially, sorry,
that wasn't the question. It's not whether it's your recommendation, but is that what the standard is telling us must occur?
Yes.
Okay. So the standard is not more nuanced between what happens between 55 and 65 dBA. That's the band range it deals with, is it?
Yes, correct. So it uses both land use zoning, and also the noise contours. And in that case, it would have neither. So it would fall between the ICB and the OCB.
Yeah. Okay. I'm getting it.
I'm now totally confused. Okay, that's why I was sort of trying to seek some plan to explain what we were saying.
Well,
because
there are voice contour
yes,
plans attached to the back of Mr. Fitzgerald's primary statement of evidence.
yes,
And some of them are relatively simple in that they show 55, 60, 65 contour at various historic, current, and potential futures.
Yeah.
I don't know, Mr. Fitzgerald, if you want to identify which of those might be the best one to look at.
Yes. Okay. So I mean, the 3A is probably one good one to go straight to.
before you do that, can I just explain where I'm at? This 3.8 assumes that we've got a mixed use zone, not a port zone.
That's right.
Correct.
It's the very proposition that you were putting
Yes.
to Mr. Fitzgerald, but
Yes.
you have in front of you that.
Yes.
choice.
Yes, that's right. But the last sentence says that would be not inside the ICB, it would be between the ICB and the OCB. This is in this middle area. So that's not the position that David's question got to.
Yeah, I misread that. Sorry.
Yes,
I had read it as inside the.
yes.
It's between.
Okay. Now I'm all clear and there's nodding heads. And we don't need to go to the plans.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Apologies, Craig.
No, sorry, it's hard to read the room from here. So.
Yeah.
Okay, I think, are we carrying on?
Sorry, just one other question. Sorry, Mr. Fitzgerald, just if I can finish off.
No problem.
Just going back to my earlier question then, and it really, although it's dealt with in 3.8, I'm turning over now to your 3.9. And my question is that between 55, does the standard tell us what needs to happen between 55 and 65 dB? And is there no room for flexibility in dealing with what's quite a wide band of noise exposure?
Yes, I mean, it does. So table 1 and 2, well, table 1 is for existing ports, so that's more relevant. So it provides a series of suggested control measures. And that's the one within the inner control boundary. It says new noise sensitive activities and alterations, or whatever. Sorry, inside the inner control boundary, it says new noise sensitive activities should be prohibited activities. Then it goes on to say, in exceptional circumstances, new noise sensitive activities could be discretionary activities subject to consents and the likes. And so those exceptions are used at places like Port Napier, LP Littleton, Otago, Nelson. They're environments where they've got existing residential, traditional residential communities that are in the 65 to 67, 68 range. And so the noise sensitivities that are enabled, they're not really in a very good location, but they allow some discretion for alterations and the likes. That's what those exceptions are for. They're not for new noise sensitive activities. New noise sensitive zones, I should say. Here, they're not appropriate environments.
Okay, thank you.
And then there's similar controls but between the ICB and the OCB for existing activities.
Okay, so I'm clear on that. So we're moving to the exclusion of rail movements, Craig?
Yes. So from 312, Mr. Stiles maintains that noise from trains is not port noise, despite pointing out in paragraph 7.9 of my evidence in chief that the definition of port noise includes rail traffic at a port, which I've taken to mean the port zone. Therefore, I consider that I've followed the assessment method and set out in the port noise standard. However, Mr. Stiles has identified a compliance issue that would arise with the LAF max noise limits applying in the proposed rule noise-P4, particularly at the residential sites adjacent to the rail line near the corner of Bailey and Breakwater Roads. The Port Napier port noise rules have been mentioned as a relevant example. That's another port I look after in terms of understanding their noise footprint and rules. Napier Operative District Plan Rule 28.15 includes a link to exemptions to the noise limits in Rule 57.9 Part E relating to train movements. I've included a copy of both of those rules in Appendix A so you can see how that works. A similar exemption in noise S1(6) could link to the existing exemption and rules following noise P4. Again, a copy of those rules are attached in Appendix B and it would have the same effect. So just taking you over the overleaf, I suppose, to Appendix A, I've highlighted the relevant parts of those. So in 28.15 of the Napier Operative District Plan, this is it's the start of the port noise rules. They'll look reasonably familiar. They're reasonably aligned with what's proposed here. But you can see it starts off with the following noise conditions apply to all land uses other than those exempted in 57.5. And if we go to, I think it's an incorrect reference, by the way. You go down to 57.9, it's a typo. The exemptions to trains other than on private sidings or where being tested, maintained, or when being tested, maintained, loaded or unloaded. So basically, it doesn't apply to movements, but it does apply to the loading and unloading of trains. In the PDP, there is following noise P4, there's a table that says noise shall be measured in accordance with 6801 and assessed in accordance with 6802 unless otherwise specified in this district plan. The noise rules and effects standards do not apply to the following activities. Number 3 is trains on rail lines and crossing bells with road reserve, including at railway yards, railway sidings or stations. However, this exemption does not apply to the testing when stationary, maintenance, loading or unloading of trains. So if we had a similar exemption that brought it back to here, it would avoid that technicality.
Okay, I had a question about Napier. Craig, I actually live on Bluff Hill.
Oh, yeah.
Thankfully, just over the other side. So the only port noise I hear is when the sort of the bells or sirens go off when they're coming in and out, and the cruise ships seem to like celebrating when they're coming and going. But yeah, that's a very difficult issue for that port on the other side of the hill with those houses facing. They are reviewing their district plan currently, and there's a draft district plan out to be notified early next year. Are you aware whether they've followed this exemption through into the new proposed provisions?
Yes, so I've had involvement in that, but
Yes.
I haven't looked at it in probably a year, and
Yes.
my recollection is that it has been carried over for consistency.
Carried over. Yeah.
My understanding is that it reflected the conditions of consent that they had, so it was just adopted into the plan. So I suspect changing that would, upset the apple cart of it.
Yes. Okay. In your Appendix B, PDP in part, this is the current noise P4. Is this what you've given us?
Correct. So that's, I've just highlighted number 3 because it's most relevant. But
Yes.
at the moment, it says, yes, it says noise should be measured in accordance with 6801 and 2, which is normal, unless otherwise specified in the plan. So in the port noise, it's a set in accordance with 6809 being the port noise standard. So if in the rule where it talks about the noise limit, it has a similar exemption, but and refers back to here, we would have we would avoid that technical non-compliance with the noise limits.
Okay, all good. Do you have any questions on this, David? Well, I do want to go to the final question. Can we now move to your figure 3B, Craig, in your evidence?
Yes. Got it here.
So this is an important question and answer for us. This goes back to future modelling. Do you agree that for the purpose of district plans, looking out to around 2035 is a reasonable time frame for future modelling and thinking about what might happen in ports?
Yes.
Can you, yes, you want to qualify that?
Oh, I mean, the port noise standard actually says there's no time frame for port development.
At least 10.
It just says at least 10 years, but the reason behind that is for the life of the plan. Yeah.
Yes. The second question is that, was it your idea to put the facility on the SLC land, or was that something you were asked to do by the port company?
So, as I say, that it predates SLC's involvement. So its original placement on there was, yeah, predated SLC. Following that, in terms of through this process, it was thought that if it's zoned for port purposes, it needs to represent the activities that are enabled. So if again, where this is this chicken and egg situation, if is it zoned mixed use or is it your zone for port? If it remained as zoned for port activities, we look at the activities that are provided for in that zone, and some representative activities on that zone of what's happened before, I suppose. So
I really want to take you back to your answers to the original questions about the master plan, and you made it very clear to us that with your modelling, you take advice from the port companies about what's realistic, and you sometimes roll them back. In terms of, port companies are generally optimistic. I've worked for quite a few. They're always looking for the opportunity, and are quite optimistic. But given what you've heard in evidence through the last 2 days, do you agree that it's fanciful that there might be a large port piece of equipment located on the SLC land going forward?
I don't think it's fanciful. It's not at the moment. Well, I mean, SLLC have told us that they're not going to use one. So in that sense, then that's quite determinative, isn't it? In terms of that they won't use it, but that's based on their current assumption that it will be used for a different purpose. I suppose I'm not making the presumption that it is going to be changed to mixed use. There is a I suppose, where is it? There is some qualification over what's reasonably likely in the future scenario. I'm just trying to find the right clause. So where it talks in 6.2.2, it talks about likely future port development, and it provides quite a lot of commentary thereafter about that planning it requires The standard provides for measures, particularly setting of noise control boundaries, which address both existing ports and areas where there is a reasonable potential for growth and development to occur with no fixed time frame. Yes, but anyway, so there's reasonable potential for growth.
Okay, so let's take that test. Let's call it a test. Reasonable potential for growth of the port in the 13-year period up to 2035. That's what we're looking at. So do you think, given what you've heard from the new owner, and also the fact that the port doesn't own this land, that there's reasonable potential for, and I can't remember the name of that stacker or bridge stacker to be placed on your future port development scenario out to 2035?
Not based on.
Reasonable.
So yeah, so I suppose the distinction here is no, that it's not from their perspective reasonable in terms of what's going on there. But I suppose from a planning exercise, what's anticipated by the port zone, that's a different proposition. So I suppose if we are to entertain, well, I am entertaining that if it gets changed to mixed use, then you don't have those activities on there, and it's not likely. If it does remain port zone as notified, then it's anticipating port activity on that site. I suppose that's the distinction for me.
Okay, knowing what you know and what you've heard, do you think it's reasonably likely that there will be a port or a stacker owned and operated by the port on this piece of land?
Not without it being retained as port zone.
So you didn't answer my question. Given what you know and you've heard, do you think it's reasonably likely in the next 13 years that there will be a port stacker owned and operated by the port on this piece of land? Yes or no?
I don't actually know the answer to that, but I'd say no based on what I've heard from SLC, because their intention is not to.
Thank you. I think that's sufficient. David, do you have any other questions? No. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, sorry, I know 4 o'clock was right on us. It's a quick matter.
Yes.
So I will occasionally ask a question of clarification.
Yes.
And it's directly in response to an answer he gave. So well, we've got it online.
Yes.
Mr. McMahon asked him about what's sort of standard said about when you're in between certain noise levels. In fact, he asked actually the 55 to 65 levels, and the answer Mr. Fitzgerald gave, he read off at table 1 to 653. He read off the land use controls that actually applied inside the inner control boundary, and that's when he remember that discussion about what might be exceptions to the 65, and then he was asked, or then he made the comment, they're very his words, similar controls between the 55 and 65, in other words, between the ICB and the OCB. And could I ask, because this is very important, it left you with a completely different answer, I think. Could Mr. Fitzgerald just refer you to the first part of table 1, which does state what the standard says about land use controls in that area between the inner control boundary, because that's where the SLC site would be. Yes. In that other scenario. So could Mr. Fitzgerald he read out the other one, but he just read out the ones that says between the outer control boundary and the inner control boundary, what the land use controls are proposed, what the standard says about them.
Yeah, I think you might be right. It's not necessarily similar. It is actually different if I said similar. So that the inner control boundary, which is the one I mentioned, if there's no new noise sensitive activity should be prohibited. Between the outer control boundary and the inner control boundary, which is the one that you're seeking clarification on, it says new noise sensitive activities and alterations or additions to existing buildings used for noise sensitive activities should be permitted activities subject to conditions requiring new buildings or alterations or additions to existing buildings used for noise sensitive activities to be adequately insulated from port noise. Sorry, that was 4 lines without a full stop.
Yeah. Yeah, Derek, appreciate it. I picked that up as well on the way, that he didn't answer that question, but I think it was clear in my mind that the evidence he had on paper gave us that answer. So, look, I think, I know we're at the end because David's itching to get away to a plane. Just in conclusion, obviously it was heroic to think we'd get through in a couple of days, even with the 3 hours that we've lost at the start and the end. I'd just like to thank everyone for your participation. It's been a busy but very interesting hearing to date. I had expected that we'd be well through your witnesses, Derek, but just hasn't happened. And that goes to us really wanting to understand this evidence. And I think that's the right way to deal with this. We do have a couple of things just to clarify. There's some work you're going to do, Derek, for us on some plans.
Yes.
You're going to give us some advice on the scope issue.
Yes.
We would like Hamish for you to organise Mr. Heath and Mr. James around some questions about effects on the city centre zone that goes to vibrancy and vitality, but also thinking about the connectivity between the areas, just from an economic effects perspective. And I wondered, Hamish, whether you could craft that and circulate that to me, just to double check we've got the right questions, and maybe just bounce it around Derek and Morgan as well, just to make sure we've got something precise. And if that could be done, obviously before we reconvene. And the last thing I'll say is we do have this period 22 to 26 for the sweep up. My intelligence from Julie and Christine is that we don't have that all filled up, but we will need at least another day for this hearing. And if you can just liaise the parties with Christine and Julie and just work out the most convenient time for everyone, that would be appreciated. So with that, Ronald, I wonder whether you do us the honour of just closing our hearing with the karakia or Mihi to finish us off. Thank you.
Stay connected.
Thank you very much. So we look forward to reconvening on the next date. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.